Hey there guys, it's Metro, and welcome to the healing spec tier list for Mythic Plus 5-man dungeons made specifically for patch 7.3. In this video, we will be ranking healers based on their ability to impact 5-man groups. It is purely made from my opinions, formulated from thousands of Mythic Plus runs, as well as information from the recent Mythic Plus Dungeon Invitational, and parsing sites like WoW Progress and Warcraft logs. For this tier list, I will be primarily focused on three main factors: the healer's healing kit, as well as CDs and how applicable it all is to the dungeon, their ability to weave in meaningful damaging globals, and the group-wide utility they bring and how it impacts the pace of the dungeon. I'll also be heavily factoring in things like mobility, defensive bulk, and of course global trends that have to be considered as well. With all that aside, let's get right into it. Tier 1, number one overall is the Holy Paladin. The Holy Paladin has long been a juggernaut in 5-mans, but with the continued pushing of higher and higher keys, their kit reigns as the total package for all types of 5-man content. Their healing kit alone is enough to say that they are one of the strongest healers in the game outright, but it particularly shines bright in 5-mans. The thing Holy Paladin is most adept at is quick burst healing, and of course this is exactly what you are often faced with in Dangerous Mythic Plus. The most noticeable strength comes from two of their talents, Devotion Aura and Beacon of Virtue. Both are exceedingly poor options for raid fights, but appear to have been designed perfectly for 5-mans, leaving them immune to any type of tuning one might expect for healers based on raid progression. The passive reduction from Devotion, along with when used properly, can carry a whole group, but on weeks when certain affixes have the potential to devastate players, Devotion Aura will be a savior. On top of these, Avenging Wrath and Tears Deliverance work quite well for the type of healing often needed in 5-mans, and Lay on Hands truly is the cherry on top, capable of saving lives on a reduced CD thanks to all the synergy offered to it in Legion. They also have a reliable but not exceptional external CD with Hand of Sacrifice that has been tailored to their kit very well this expansion. If that weren't enough, their damage potential is truly astounding. In a version of the game where healers can do a meaningful amount of damage always, no healer can truly stand up to Paladin with their burst window. Thanks to how strong the Potion of Old War is for burst, a Holy Paladin can easily do more damage than actual damage dealers, and scale extremely hard with haste and other stats, so any situation that they can fire everything with lust will mean a sizable chunk of health shaved off the boss every time, usually within a window where there is no healing needed anyway. They do have relatively weak AoE, as their only usage is Consecrate, with the CD tied to it, but since you can drop it and it will deal damage for globals to come, be sure it's down on CD, and use the free globals to heal up or throw some Holy Shocks out. It should also be noted that there isn't a single ability that Paladins have to do damage with that has a cast time, significantly helping them in many situations where other healers might struggle. Their utility kit has some width to it, but nothing superb. As discussed in the prop pally section of my tank tier list, abilities like Blessing of Protection have some extreme niche usages, but when they are strong, they are unbeatable. Examples including bopping off the bleed on Morose or immuning the Crushing Depths mechanic from the last boss in Eye of Vijara, as well as many more. Freedom also has some advantages, but again, is quite niche, far from something you can count on regularly. Their mobility is a little below average, but coupled with strong instant cast heals, a Holy Paladin should never be out of position. As a perk, they're often going to be in melee range of the boss, negating mechanics that otherwise would come to them. This is a mixed bag depending on the dungeon, but in general it should help the Paladin's positional requirement seem like less of a burden. One final strength Paladin has absolutely is their defensive bulk. Easily the bulkiest of all 6 healing specs, they still have a flat out immunity and 20% reductions on a 1-minute CD, but where they pick up extra points is the naturally high health pool they have received with Legion. Their design in Legion saw them focus on using their own health pool as a resource in some ways, but after all this time it has effectively been left in a situation where this is no longer a problem at all for 5-mans, and they now just have free health to make their lives even easier. They also have a reduction tied to the usage of Judgment, a spell you should be using on CD for damage output as well. In short, Holy Paladin is the true number one. Their healing kit and CDs are simply outstanding, their damage can be game-breaking, and their utility, mobility, and defensive abilities are all enough to augment their strengths greatly. Anytime you see a Paladin in the healing slot, expect great things. But be wary, not every Paladin out there understands that the damage Holy Paladin can put out is one of the most valuable assets of any healer. Tier 1. Number 2 is Resto Druid. There was a time when Druids were undisputed king of 5-man healing, and it is not hard to see why. Not much has changed for the Druids over time, and they are true peers to Paladins, thanks to a few huge upsides. Their healing kit and model in general is perfectly tailored to 5-mans. On the move, hot healing is something any group should find invaluable. Over the years, the hot model has gotten increasingly strong in all content, and on top of this, they still have amazing CDs such as Tranquility and Tree of Life to rapidly make up for the lack of health a group member might have. They have also been given a very strong artifact ability, which allows the hot model to get even stronger. They have arguably the best external CD as well, as Ironbark sees a 1-minute cooldown and reduces damage and increases hot healing on the target thanks to the Stonebark talent. Their damage potential requires a great deal of effort to maximize, but is extremely effective even without perfect play. Resto Druid retains Sunfire, which spreads to any enemy within 5 yards. This, coupled with the Feral Affinity's talent Swipe in cat form, can lead to some very high AoE damage, but of course requires multiple globals of setup and maintenance, as well as a form that you cannot properly heal from. Regardless, Resto Druid can do great damage with very few globals. Keep Sunfire up on any multi-target situation, and keep both dots up on bosses, and you'll have done more than your fair share of damage. In terms of utility, they have an undeniably strong kit. They are the only healer with battle res, making them a sure pick for any difficult keystones, but also have Ursul's Vortex and Typhoon, which remains an incredibly effective AoE interrupt combination. You can also make great benefit of Vortex on any mob type that refuses to stand still, like the Pelters in Neltharion's Lair or the Spiders at the end of Vault. They also still have Roots, which has some niche usage, but truly miss Stampeding Roar now that only Guardian and Feral have access to it. In terms of mobility, Resto Druid is easily the most mobile, because almost all of their spells can be cast while moving in some way, and even if they had nothing else, this would still make them formidable. But to sweeten the deal, they have 2 amazing movement options in the 30-tier talent tree, including the favored Displacer Beast Blink. And as always, Dash is still an option, which will be the most useful when running between packs or even running back from mistakes. I personally find them to be above average in terms of survival as well, as they also have a 1-minute 20% reduction, as well as Bear Form, which many healers will choose to talent further with Guardian Affinity, granting them a passive 6% reduction while sacrificing the move speed and damage from Feral Affinity. In short, the Restoration Druid has only grown stronger over time in Legion, which really says a lot about where Paladin is. With Resto Druid, you know exactly what you're getting every single time. A very strong healing model capable of dealing with most affixes quite well, some very applicable utility, and a speedy, flexible player. Tier 2, number 1 is Restoration Shaman. Resto Shamans have a few clear strengths when it comes to healing 5-mans, specifically the widest arsenal of CDs and an amazing combination of single target heals. Using their CDs wisely will result in the largest impact any healer can have on the survival of the group they are in, and thanks to the way Tidal Wave's synergy works, they can back up any flaws in their kits with intense single target heals. Abilities like Spirit Link Totem alone would be, and have been in the past, enough to keep Resto Shaman considered a serious weapon in 5-mans. Also noticeable is their Mastery, which increases healing done based on health percentage of the target, which of course has tremendous upside in very difficult Mythic Plus dungeons, but unfortunately leaves them wanting for Grievous weeks. A final point of note is that they are also the only healer without a targeted external cooldown, but they have so many other cooldowns it's hardly needed. Their damage potential is a true flaw of the Shaman, however. Their all-around damage is regrettable, as they require procs for Lava Burst to be usable enough, have no native way to increase their damage overall, and have to eat a 13,000 mana cast on every single cast of Lava Burst. In terms of AoE, they have no spell that will hit a large number of mobs, and that also leaves them severely behind almost every other healer in damage in 5-mans. They do, however, have Chain Lightning, which does a very respectable amount of damage, but does only hit 3 targets, and obviously requires constant casting, unlike Consecrate and Sunfire. From a utility standpoint, Shaman rests comfortably at number 1. Without question, they have a very wide array of utility. They are the only healers who can bring Bloodlust to the dungeon, which can be very important depending on the comp, but useless in others. They are also one of 2 healers with an AoE stun, and theirs can be done from ranged, making for some incredibly useful scenarios. They also have a talented Wind Rush Totem, which acts as a ground targeted 60% speed boost, making it hard to use but unique among all healers. Most importantly, they have Ankh, which in past expansions has been supremely useful, but to this day remains a free battle res, which can be especially important in the healer role. They also retain an old favorite in Purge, which remains useful for some mob types, especially those in Arcway, but not great usage otherwise. They also boast a strong kit in terms of mobility, thanks to various enhancements to Spirit Walker's Grace, as well as the level 30 tier, which contains Wind Rush Totem. They unfortunately lack a Holy Shock or a Rejuve type spell, something that is incredibly potent and instant cast, but thanks to Ghost Wolf, they simply need to stay ahead of groups, and they should always be able to stay with the pace of the tank. In terms of survival, Resto Shaman has an interesting quirk, being the healer with the largest reduction, but also on the largest CD. Astral Shift is a 40% reduction, but on a 1.5 minute cooldown. In my opinion, the longer CD is perfectly acceptable and totally worth the extra 20% reduction, as situations that test the healer's survival usually come either very frequently or very infrequently, and the 1.5 minutes is well within the second mention. And just in case, they also have Ankh as a backup to any type of mistake. In short, the Restoration Shaman is the truest support healer you can ask for, with an incredible CD arsenal and the best utility available in the game. Their single target healing is among the best available, but it's tied to frequent casting, and many of their abilities require position-based healing. They remain a well-rounded option, especially in situations where there is very little availability for damage globals. Tier 2, number 2, is the Holy Priest. The Holy Priest has the largest amount of answers to the largest amount of problems in all 5-man content, and from my vantage point, they are the healer most equipped to deal with the raw throughput requirements some high keys might demand. When examining the spec, it feels like they are on the borderline of having too many healing abilities, and this is obviously a good thing for the different types of problems you might come up against in 5-mans. They still boast the original OP 5-man healing spell, being Prayer of Healing, and have a plethora of other multi-target options to go along with it. However, the most powerful option in their arsenal is Holy Word Serenity, a heal that will rival Lay on Hands, and anything a paladin has for that matter. Now that overflowing has been removed, they remain the healer with the most useful healing kit all around. Where they are clearly lacking is the cooldown department. Guardian Spirit has an incredibly long cooldown and will be hard to get the full use out of its proc on the target in a 5-man outside of a few abilities, and Divine Hymn, which is strong but still requires standing still, unlike Tranquility. Their damage kit relies on 4 spells, which is very similar to most healers, but their interactions are more potent than average. Holy Word Chastise is a very strong single target ability to have, especially when talented, but in terms of raw damage is still behind abilities like Holy Shock and Lava Burst crits. They also feature a dot and a casted filler in Smite, but it also interacts with Serendipity and lowers the CD on Chastise, which can become incredibly potent, especially during Bloodlust. Their single target is average, but where they stand out is certainly AoE, especially very large AoE. Holy Nova as a single global is unmatched in its damage output, and when paired with a tank who needs very little attention during AoE like Death Knight or Bear, this allows the healer to do millions of DPS, something no other healer can do on any such pull. On average sized pulls, the spell falls to the level of Swipe plus Sunfire Spread, which still remains very effective. It should also be recognized that while extremely potent, it does require constant usage in order to be fully useful, differing from Druid and Paladin in that respect. Unfortunately, for as strong as their healing and damage can be, their utility is exceedingly poor, which harkens back to a day when they were the de facto best healer available, but brought absolutely nothing else. They have one interesting tier talent in the 45 tier, allowing for Shining Force and AoE knockback and slow from a target's location, or Censure, which changes the auxiliary effect of Chastise to now be a stun instead of a disorient, but neither present anything particularly useful or unique, as knockbacks and stuns aren't particularly uncommon in the healer slot. The 30 tier is also utility based, but even more disappointing, as the most effective choice is Angelic Feathers. For those who played Priest in MoP, you will remember just how absurdly powerful the feathers were, so to see them reduced to a 40% for 5-second use is quite sad, although it does add up if you use it diligently on the tank and other slow members. Outside of that, they have a few vestigial abilities with some poor usage. Shackle Undead, sadly, may be the most applicable, capable of acting as a hard CC for difficult Black Rook weeks, or also as an interrupt under the same situations. Leap of Faith has no discernible usage from my vantage point, despite being a way to get a slow tank to move on ahead. Dispel Magic is identical to Purge, and useful only in a handful of cases, like we discussed. Mass Dispel can be valuable in some dungeons, but typically there is nothing that requires more than one target to be spelled immediately at the risk of the dungeon's progress. And finally, Mind Control, which had some pretty cool usage back in WoD challenge modes, likely is completely void at this point. Their sad story turns to Chapter 2 when discussing increasing mobility, as they are easily the least mobile healer. The only option is feathers, but as mentioned, they are very weak. Priests are lucky to have a variety of different instant casts, but in 2017 that is simply not enough to matter. And finally, equally poor is their survival. They're the only healer without any sort of damage reduction CD, but do have some ways that they can bridge the gap. They have easily the most survival focused legendary in the entire game, that being the Cloak, which allows them to cheat death once every 10 minutes, although it is likely requiring constant swapping as it becomes useless otherwise. They also have a single point trait that allows them to benefit from Guardian Spirit, which will certainly save their lives, but again is less optimal than an actual damage reduction that would do the same. Ultimately, the only real ability their kit offers natively for preservation is Desperate Prayer, which instantly heals you for a large amount and increases your health by 30%, decaying by 2% over time, averaging out to barely more than Paladin has naturally. This ability will be most useful if used before massive damage, but still considerably less valuable than a 20% short CD like other healers have. In short, the Holy Priest resembles something caught up in a bygone era. Their healing is exceptional and boasts the best AoE damage of any healer, but everything else is suspect to the point of being invalid when compared. They possess no true utility of any kind and are the least speedy and mobile of all the classes, and have to use spells meant as healing CDs in order to survive dangerous damage. With Holy, you know exactly what you are getting: a ballistic warhead of insane healing, and if they are smart, great AoE damage. Expect nothing else. Tier 3, number 1. Number 5 overall is Mistweaver Monk. Before we begin on this section, I'd like to say that I see an absolutely disproportionately low number of healing monks, to the point that I had to read forums and guides just to be able to understand exactly how all their spells interact, especially their damaging spells, as the ones I do see almost never deal real damage. So, on the healing front, I find Mistweavers to be very well suited to healing anything but 5 players. Their entire kit appears to be targeted at spreading heals around and keeping multiple players healed, but when the hammer falls, they lack the 5 target burst healing other healers may have, and will take longer overall to heal up burst damage than them as well. To me, Mistweaver feels like a healer caught in between 2 mindsets in 5-mans. They have a lot of healing over time options, but lack the potency to be compared to Resto Druid. They have some sizable single target throughput thanks to Enveloping Mist and Infuse, but not strong enough to be compared to Holy Paladin or Holy Priest. They have some great CDs that all look like strong additions too. Revival is their big CD, but as it's instant, it's been nerfed many times since the introduction and now simply heals less than other healing CDs, partially thanks to its secondary benefit of removing debuffs, which again is wholly useless in 5-mans. They also have Thunder Focus T, which is a short CD ability that heavily affects the usage of 1 to 3 spells depending on talents, which we will be discussing shortly, but again feels like a weaker version of a CD like Wings, as it only affects single casts at a time. They have of course Life Cocoon, which thanks to a couple artifact traits absorbs damage and acts as a heavy healing CD to a single target, but without traits to reduce its CD, it feels less effective outright than abilities like Pain Suppression or Barkskin, and as it absorbs damage instead of reducing damage taken, it can be considerably less effective in certain situations. They also have a talented Chi-Ji as a throughput option, but again, on 3-minute CD, the talents feel less effective than something like Incarnation, even though it very well may be the strongest CD they have available. Overall, I feel like their healing kit has a lot of spread to it, and appears to be stronger the more targets there are that need healing, following a steep curve. However, when 3 to 5 targets need healing, it feels like they have too many hots to deal with quick dangerous damage, where all other healers in front of them have at least one if not many responses to this problem. As an extra point of interest, I'd like to bring up their level 100 talent tier, as it is very unique and has the potential to have a huge impact in the right hands. All 3 talents heavily impact their ability in 5-mans. Mana Tea is very strong on its own, as you will often be spamming your heaviest heals, meaning frequent drinking, although this likely isn't needed. Focused Thunder seems to be the go-to talent, makes Thunder Focus T apply to the next 3 casts, making it a sizably stronger cooldown, especially when compared to what we have discussed prior. But more interesting is Rising Thunder, which resets Thunder Focus T CD when you use Rising Sun Kick, core part of their offense. Ideally, it would seem that you would be DPSing as often as possible, and this means Thunder Focus T can be used every 2 to 3 globals, which to me seems incredibly strong. I myself have seen very little information on this topic, but if any Mistweaver would care to go into detail of the strengths of this talent, please do so in the comments. Regardless, I think this is one of the most interesting and dynamic talent tiers of any healer spec, and if there was a way to have 2 or potentially all 3 of these, monks would be incredibly strong. In terms of damage, they resemble a weaker holy priest to me. Because of how teachings of the monastery work, they seemingly will be looking to reset CDs on single targets, just like holy priest, but ultimately their spells don't deal any more damage than holy priest. In terms of AoE, they have spinning crane kick, which is similar in scope to holy nova, but certainly doesn't do more damage, and requires you to channel it, making it a heavier commitment for less result. All of these abilities do require melee as well, which can be a detriment, but they also retain Crackling Jade Lightning for some extra range damage. It's hard to know exactly where monk is in terms of damage, but I would say they are below average based on this comparison, depending on just how heavy the impact from the talent section is. From a utility standpoint, they too have almost nothing, but certainly are stronger than priests. They have a similar talent tier to Brewmaster Monk in that Ring of Peace and Leg Sweep are both incredibly strong, but again share exclusivity. Again, if there was a way to have both, it would be very, very strong. They also have Song of Chi-Ji on that tier, which I don't believe I've ever seen used ever, if effectively at all, but it strikes me as interesting, although probably weaker than Leg Sweep in any conceivable situation. It's a powerful thing to have an AoE stun as a healer, but it requires melee range, making it inferior to Shamans, who have a much more dynamic kit on top of it. Other than that, the only other utility they have is Tiger's Lust, which gives them 70% speed boost on a target for 30 seconds. The distinct drawback here is that it is talented on the same tier as important movement abilities for the Mistweaver, but as a concession, it also acts as a freedom. Overall, less impressive than Shamans in terms of speed, and less useful as a root break than actual Paladin's freedom. The only other utility they appear to have is a slow aura around their Transcendence Ghost, which may have some usage in certain fixes, but again seems to be very difficult to use on average. They also still have paralysis and a speed component to their taunt, but again, very slim usage. Obviously, they are easily the second most mobile, if not tied for first with druids. The main problem I already spoke of is their mobility would directly affect their utility, and this is a trade-off druid does not have to make on their talents. Transcendence is incredibly strong too, but their true strength comes from rolling, and how many of their spells can be thrown out while moving, although they lack real bursts of speed that druid might have. In terms of their survival, I find they are comfortably average. They have an entire tier dedicated to survival, which is obviously better than priests, and have Fortifying Brew, which gives 20% more health and reduces 20% of damage for less time than other healers, but on a 1.5 minute CD. This is the same CD as Astral Shift, but it is difficult to compare if the 20% health is more effective than another 20% reduction. Overall, I would prefer the shortest CD possible, but they can also take Dampen Harm for an additional 20 to 50% reduction on just a 2-minute CD, where the reduction depends directly on the incoming damage taken. In short, Mistweaver is a very well balanced healer and does most things well, but nothing spectacular for 5-mans. To me, it feels like their kit is particularly well suited to raid healing, but they lack the sort of reactionary big heals the top specs might use frequently. Regardless of my estimation of their healing, their CDs, utility, and damage are all average at best, leaving them less desirable than a spec that has a distinct strength. And finally, tier 3, number 40th overall is Discipline Priest. It pains me dearly to say that Discipline Priest has become so ineffective, but their crash is easy to trace. When creating the spec in Legion, they had the echoes of MOP challenge modes to tend with. During MOP, they were easily the best 5-man healer by a margin so unbelievable you simply can't measure it. They did everything better than everyone else, and in an era where healer DPS was near nothing, Disc could easily challenge actual damaging specs, similar to how Holy Paladin is now. That loomed large, and ultimately, as predicted, their entire kit is hindered by the past. In terms of healing, their abilities, damaging coefficients all directly affect their actual HPS. Even after a rework that looked like a death sentence for raiders, their new gifts for 5-man simply aren't enough to change their place in 5-mans overall. As this is being uploaded during the heat of the Mythic Plus Invitational, it is clear to see Disc struggle mightily with challenges other healers, especially Holy Priests, deal with within a few globals. Furthermore, their once settled niche of extreme burst healing around the time of Nighthold launch has been scrubbed out entirely, leaving them with a similar fate to Protection Paladins. Luckily, they still have pain suppression, despite it being a considerably longer CD. Thanks to the artifact, they have a 4-point trait reducing the cooldown and a 1-point trait that turns it into a minor healing CD as well. Offensively, you would expect their DPS should be something that they do best, right? Guess again. Thanks to the concerns with the MOP model, almost everything that would increase their damage has been severely hindered hindered, especially in Mythic Plus. Even the heating up passive mechanic their weapon has naturally is disabled. Despite even when it is available, it still equates to less damage than other healers. It's come to a point now where in 5-mans, Discipline are among the worst damage dealers overall, if not number 6 for sure, thanks to almost zero multi-target healing options and miserable single-target damage, thanks to a fear of overscaling their healing. Compared directly to Holy Priests, the results are truly sad, even though Disc can deal damage while healing directly. Their utility used to have a clear niche too in Wrath and Cataclysm. They once reigned as the king of absorbs, and even though they would have nothing else, it would be enough to make them worth discussing in Mythic Plus. But even this was nerfed to completely unusable standards. Power Word Shield is no longer spammable and boasts a measly number for a CD, effectively reduced to an instant cast atonement builder. They share all the same problems with other forms of utility mentioned in Holy. At one point in the Legion beta, the Dominate Mind talent allowed them to have a permanent pet, but even that was deemed to be too overpowered. Mobility is only slightly better in Holy in that they have their main heal available on the move, now in and out of combat, and it grants them a small speed boost when used. Angelic Feathers is again the only option, but for anyone who played Discipline in Mob, it feels like another large target of punishment. In terms of survival, they are at least marginally better than Holy, thanks to a 4-point trait that makes Fade reduce damage by up to 13% when 4/4. Fade is now only a 30-second CD, so Disc averages to have the best survival CD in the game as often as possible, considering they can still apply shields to themselves, and you could potentially end up with more than 4 traits thanks to relics. In short, Discipline fails to react well to situations where everyone is in danger. Their entire model is based around being set up for danger before it happens, and this is something they trade off on by being able to DPS fully while healing. Unfortunately, their damage is poor and their healing isn't anywhere as strong as Holy Priests, thus relegating them to worst overall. Disc also features the highest skill floor of any healer easily, as you need to be able to monitor atonement, maximize DPS, and deal with idiots making your job harder than it needs to be. Perhaps in a very well-organized group, Discipline can shine, but as it would need some serious buffs to utility and damage to return to its former god tier status, it is now currently the worst option. Well, that's the list. What'd you think? I want to take one more opportunity to say that these are my opinions, although they do seem to coincide with the recent Mythic Plus Invitational pretty heavily. The focus of these comment sections are always on what I picked last instead of anywhere else, so please, if you're a fan of Discipline or an experienced Mistweaver, feel free to leave a detailed reason why I may have undersold these specs. Regardless, in Legion, everything is balanced very well, so you should never feel discouraged to play what you enjoy. The goal of this list is not to say you should never play the worst specs, but when you compare 6 things side by side, there has to be a best and a worst. It wouldn't be a tier list if I said all 6 healing specs are pretty good, now would it? As an added bonus, I've added a pinned comment to the comment section with my breakdown on an individual level. For example, ranking the 6 healers in terms of just utility or just damage. Check it out if you want a more detailed breakdown. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, look out for the DPS tier list coming soon.